Hello friends, my name is Satchel like a bag Drakes, and welcome to Anti-Semantics, a show where we will be concisely looking at select points from the game at hand. This time, it's the Stanley Parable.
This is the story of a man named Stanley.
Giving a synopsis of the Stanley Parable is quite a challenge, mostly because the heart of its offerings can only truly be experienced and enjoyed in the driver's seat. I strongly recommend you play it for yourself for a good understanding. It's well worth the knowledge gained from it. At face value, however, it's a first-person experience title by Galactic Cafe that's based on a mod of the same name that they made for Half-Life quite some time ago. You play as a Dilbert-painted office man named Stanley. He leads a seemingly normal life and works a middle-class job inputting numbers into a computer as they're told to him by an anonymous authority. One day, everyone at his workplace disappears, and a narrator, voiced by Kevin Brighting, begins speaking into his circumstance with dramatic irony. The Stanley Parable is about a lot of things, but its thesis is primarily about the idea and appearance of choice. It's your job, or maybe it isn't your job, to work with, or maybe not work with, the narrator to discover what's going on. What I immediately found in the Stanley Parable was how respectful and rigid the writing is for it. It seems as if not a single corporate nail file scraped the edges of this thing. It presumes a cultured level of comprehension without navel-gazing. In fact, the navel-gazing might have existed if this title attempted to simplify its message or hide behind metaphor. The Stanley Parable is another example of a game that capitalizes so richly on its mechanical strengths that it would lose its purpose as a film or a book. When your mind is respected by a book, film, or game, you almost don't notice it. The ease of not having to peer through euphemism or pull out relevant context is freeing. You find this here. But interestingly enough, this game covers the opposite of freedom. The topics and magnitude of vernacular used to broach these topics fall in the vein of Foucault, or at least reach for more mature experiential value. By the time the Stanley Parable released, many were already getting a kick out of rolling their eyes at the indie scene's offerings of games about games. I think it's best to remember that those who might yawn at a title like this have most likely placed themselves into a niche and consequently bored themselves unnecessarily. This French New Wave fleet of hyper-conscious gaming titles surely was never thrust upon the masses. You won't find a BuzzFeed listicle on the top 5 Stanley Parable endings. Cycling game recommendations in one of the many internet Reddit echo chambers will likely get old quickly for anyone and anything, so I don't think that this half-hearted criticism carries any meaningful gravitas in discounting what the Stanley Parable did. Any game can be considered a trend within the scene of the genre it belongs to, whether it's FPSs for AAA, isometric cow clickers for pay-to-win, or first-person experiences for games about games. One doesn't simply commit to moving to Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and then suddenly feel justified in scoffing at microbreweries and ironic mustaches. You asked for it. Halfway into my play of this title, I was reminded of a type of literary fiction referred to as game books. After the success of the regular Goosebumps books, in 1995, Scholastic Press released a new series of R.L. Stine's called Give Yourself Goosebumps, which was a children's horror fiction game book. Now, these books were novels with branching plots that were reached through the choices the reader could make. Choosing between the red pill or the blue pill would bring the reader to a different page, and their decisions would jump them around to one of a few endings. Though choosing the ending was fun to do, it was fairly clear very early on that my decisions held but so much water. Though I chose the outcome, the only real control I had was which page I turned to. The ending couldn't define me, and the adventure was already predetermined. The illusion of choice promised more than I was given. Games have the luxury of hiding this limitation of choice much better than books through visuals and variables, but we're always within the confines of the developer. The Stanley Parable exposes that, as it poses some existential questions about predestination and free will in the games we play and in our real-world careers. It calls into question the subjectivity of our perception of freedom. On one hand, I enjoy the questions it raises in a general sense, but on the other, I'm weary of reaching a demise of the sophist situation, where we have these small cocktail parties and symposiums with inconclusive gray territory questions, instead of proactively pursuing any tangible answers with absolute truth. It is very romantic and common in life to get lost in the inconclusiveness of questions. It's common to feel that way right out of college, spending the majority of your life in a classroom with time divided into semesters of work and rest, and the simple task of meeting a particular GPA grade or standardized test score, and to then be tossed out into a world that may or may not care at all about it. Entering the workplace or relationships with learned skills that might not translate. Having a young adult life or career that doesn't seem like the natural progression from the academic life you were in. Not having modular deadlines or hired counselors to talk with you. And it has you like, damn, like this is a wild west out here. Is there a clear right or wrong answer to anything? And as a result, the often modern response is to dismiss anything seemingly relative as inconclusive, to ignore the fact that neutrality is in itself an absolute belief system. I mean, this is the world of South Park, right? Like, in the world of South Park, it's a very cynical ideology in and of itself, but beyond that, it's this world where anyone who has a passionate, disposition about anything is painted as ignorant, is painted as a bigot, is painted as weird, and the only real multidimensional people are the people who don't feel passionate about anything and just sort of live in this nebulous world of hyper-relativity. But to this I'd respond with a word from Jules Poincare. To doubt everything or to believe everything are two equally convenient solutions. Both dispense with the necessity of reflection. But to clarify, the narrative of the Stanley Parable doesn't tumble far down enough into that rabbit hole to do this specifically. Many lessons are allegorical. This isn't a negative critique of that. I'm merely pointing out that some of the subject matter, in its sci-fi parallel timeline presentation, can lend itself to thoughts like this. And it's part of the attraction for me, personally. I mean, at any moment, Lawrence Fishburne could have popped out from the side and said, "Do you think that's air you're breathing?" What makes the Stanley Parable special is that your play of it can last from 15 minutes to 5 hours, because your greatest loss is doing what the game tells you to do. The mainline ending is the worst and least fulfilling ending. After a while, I found myself in a metagame of searching for rules to break in order to reveal the story. In turn, I found a new mainline, a new fable dust path to follow that, rather than leading to one cutscene in a Pavlovian fashion, had me curiously coursing down stray branches in this empty office in hopes of finding a ledge to jump off of. These endings were egalitarian in value, but carried messages that were vastly different from one another. It becomes extremely easy to see the parallels drawn between yourself and Stanley, who are both subjected to sitting at your desk and pushing buttons for a sense of fulfillment. It's interesting to see how much this title ties in with BioShock Infinite. Avoiding spoilers, if you've played through the game and the DLC, you'll realize that the narrative is truly never ending. If each forbidden door were a tear, well, you get it. I suppose if there was a cautionary takeaway to be had with the Stanley Parable, as I made every anti-hero decision for the sake of progression, I kept asking myself, where are you taking me? What are you trying to say to me? And in truth, that question was never answered, and I'm not sure that it was supposed to be. As engaging as every ending is in this game, it's difficult for me to see what they collectively weave. In fact, they're laid out to be discovered in no particular order. I spoiled other endings for myself by making rebellious decisions ahead of time. Or did I? It is and isn't a part of the point, I suppose. I could read into the inconclusive nature of all of the endings and say that my hunger for narrative progression was a result of failing to understand what the Stanley Parable was satirizing and berating in the first place. To be fair though, I wouldn't want to over-attribute to the creative concept, which is a tragic and never-ending mistake of most art critics. It's hard to say what the writer of the Stanley Parable wanted my time for. Maybe more than anything, he wanted me to ask high-level questions about the Western individualistic definition of freedom, and question the value of choice in game and in real life. Whether that was a motive or not, I appreciated every moment in the office that I had to do that. The Stanley Parable was an unforgettable title that I'd recommend to anyone whose mind I respect.
I'm dreaming.
Well, look what we have here. Satchbag, in another one of his long-winded, heavy-handed, borderline pretentious diatribes, has managed to dream up an episode of existential commentary for a game about existential commentary. When will he appeal to his own demographic, get real and speak like a normal person? When will he chill out, man, and just get to the point, because it's just video games and fun times? And good lord, when will he stop using seizure-inducing glitch animations in his anti-semantics episodes? They give me a headache. Would you kindly share this video with your friends?